Well, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Lisi Brown. I am with South Dakota State University Extension, and I am located in the Rapid City Regional Center. Here to meet with me today is Jane Strumman with NDSU Extension, and she is located in Fargo. Before we begin with the content of our webinar, I want to provide a couple housekeeping items. We ask that if you have questions to please hold them to the end, and we will talk about them all at once. The handout and slides will be emailed after this webinar. If you did not pre-register, be sure that we have your email address so that we can email that content to you. We will also include an evaluation link when we send out our handouts. This will help us improve future webinars. In that link, it will ask for your contact information if you want to be notified about future webinars. We will not use your contact information for anything other than notifying you about webinars, just to rest assured. So let us begin. Today, we're going to really focus on increasing our understanding about aging well and what it actually means. We're going to identify the difference between aging and chronic disease. We're also going to learn what makes it more difficult for us to age well. And then finally, we're going to talk about strategies that can help us age well. So we are grateful that you are here with us today. This topic is probably one that Jane and I enjoy the most. So to begin, what exactly is aging? In a nutshell, aging just refers to how we change over time. Unfortunately, aging is often equated to disease, but those are different things happening in our body. Aging-related changes, that's our gray hair, that's our wrinkles, changes in our reaction time. Medical conditions that cause disease or disability might be something like diabetes, heart disease, dementia. Aging, and one of the primary differences between aging and disease is medical conditions can be traced to a specific cause. Their aging does increase our risk of developing disease, and that's where it gets kind of complicated, because as we get older, our risk of developing disease does increase, but it's not a clear, direct relationship. How we experience aging is a really complex interaction between us as individuals, our social economic status, our health behaviors, our stress management, all of those different factors, and then where we live, really work in this complex puzzle to lead to our outcomes as older people. Aging is probably also one of the most difficult things to study. It's extremely difficult because of how complex aging outcomes are. It's a really huge ethical quagmire to try to study aging. One of the best studies that attempted to do it was the Minnesota Nun study. And one of the challenges we face with research on human subjects is we can't control the environment entirely. We can't control the food entirely. There's just some ethical problems there. So a researcher studied some nuns living in a convent in Minnesota to try to, because their environment is pretty similar, what they eat, what they do, they have very similar lives. And he studied them over time to explore dementia risk. And it was one of the few ways that we can do that. One of the interesting outcomes of that study is they found one woman shortly before her death. She performed very well on cognitive tests, checking for dementia. But when they performed the autopsy on her, her brain was in the 90th percentile for plaques and tangles. By looking at her brain, we would have assumed that she had dementia symptoms, but she didn't. She did well on her test. So now that we understand what aging is, what does aging well mean? Despite how hard it is to study, we really have learned quite a bit about what aging well means. And it's really not one specific, like, this is what it means to age well. It's really defined by us and what quality of life looks like for us, what matters to us. For the purpose of this presentation, we are going to use the definition on the screen, which says promoting health and preventing disease and disability, along with high physical and psychological functioning and social engagement. So why is aging well such an important topic? First and foremost, our lifespan has increased tremendously. Prior to the 20th century, living to older, past age 40 was relatively uncommon. You know, most people died as younger people because of communicable disease. We had so many amazing public health advancements during the 20th century. A great example, one we tend to take for granted, is garbage, you know, in landfills. Prior to 1937, they just kind of dumped trash wherever. They didn't have the clay bottoms to prevent that seepage from getting into the groundwater. Major public health advancement that helped us really reduce the impact of acute disease. So a lot of things like that happened during the 20th century. And the age group that was actually affected most by these public health advancements were children. Prior to some of the major advancements of the 20th century, it was largely expected that families would lose one or more children. It was kind of just expected. Once death rates among children declined, more people started living into adulthood and ultimately older age, which is why we have this bubble of older adults, because after people started actually living into older ages more frequently, birth rates went down. So it's this major, huge phenomenon of change that is happening. When you think about the field of gerontology, it's actually only existed for about 115 years. Prior to the early 20th century, there just weren't enough older people to study. And the topic of aging just really wasn't something that was, you know, scientifically studied. But as life expectancy increased, the pool became larger, and learning about aging became very interesting and very important. Some interesting little tidbits about how this life expectancy has changed. So population aging is kind of referring to this change in the demographics. A country like France took 115 years for their population to go from 7% age 65 and older to 14. Some of our developing countries, say like Brazil, they're expected to see that change happen in a couple of decades. You know, so it's happening globally. This is not, you know, some special phenomenon that's happening in the more developed countries. So I have a video that I'd like to show you. Hans Rossling was an amazing statistician. He had exceptional skills for presenting data in a way that made sense and made it meaningful. So this video I'm going to show you, it talks about changes in lifespan and income for 200 years. It's 4 minutes long, but it provides a real good visualization of how our demographics have changed. Oops, forgive me.
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space, with a bit of technical assistance from the crew.
So, here we go. First, an axis for health, life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth, income per person, $400, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe! And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
Well, what you have seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involved plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
One of the interesting little pieces of data that I pulled out to just talk about how much change has happened. So for persons who live to age 100 and beyond, in 1980, it's estimated that there were 32,000. The most recent estimate indicates there's 86,000, so there's more than double. So people are living longer, they're living healthier lives. So let's transition, because now we understand why so much of the knowledge that we have about aging may not match the research findings, because it's just changed that rapidly. I mean, most of human history, we did not live to be older people, so we have had to, research is trying to catch up with how rapidly our society has changed. So what are some of the barriers to aging well? There are stereotypes about what it means to be older or younger, and people of all ages experience stereotypes about their age. We're going to go into this one a little bit more deeper because it has some pretty significant implications. Health changes. Typically, as when we are younger, the health challenges we experience are acute. They can be cured relatively easily. As we get older, they're more likely to be chronic, so that makes it harder. Having an unmanaged chronic health condition makes it difficult to age well. There's financial deficits. In general, if we have more resources financially and socially, we are better able to able to age well if we have more resources. Physical and mental decline. You know, if we happen to develop a condition that leads to frailty or challenges with cognition, that can make it a little bit more difficult to kind of have that aging well. Changes in the environment affect our ability to age well. I mean, looking at how much our society has changed, the world has changed in the past 200, you know, it's really difficult for the average person to kind of keep up with what we know from the gerontological research. And there are losses. As we get older, the chance of us experiencing the loss of a spouse, you know, the loss of a job, the loss of a career, the loss of health, those losses can be very difficult, and they can make aging well more difficult. But loss is part of living. In many ways, our personal grit in the face of challenges is really important to how we manage those losses. And I'm going to emphasize this. I said it earlier, but I think it's really important to emphasize how we age is a really complex interaction between who we are, the choices and decisions we make, the resources we have access to, and where we live. It's not an easy formula. It's really complicated. But we really need to dig into ageism. What the research tells us is quite uncanny. But in general, ageism are assumptions that the age of a person can predict individual traits, their abilities, you know, whether or not they use technology. And we have these two images on here. You know, you've got the couple at the top using, you know, canes, and then you've got the one on the bottom making fun of, you know, my generation, the millennials, for being, you know, offended, needing safe spaces. So there are these assumptions about people of all ages. The challenge with aging stereotypes is that, you know, the stereotypes about being a younger person you typically grow out of. Stereotypes about aging we grow into. And the typical common stereotypes are in memory loss, economic drain. Older people are grumpy. I mean, you've heard the saying, you know, that the older man saying, "Get off my lawn." We've heard that. That older adults are depressed and lonely. That older adults are frail. That they're bored. You know, these are common beliefs that people have about what it means to age and be an older person. And what's really startling about this is that research is telling us that how a person thinks about aging provides a good indication of how they'll experience aging. Attitudes and beliefs have been shown to predict physical functioning, subjective health, functional status, cardiovascular health, cognition, recovery from health events and disability, whether or not a person will manage a chronic disease, because some individuals will attribute a chronic disease to their age instead of the disease. Medical care seeking behavior, whether or not an older adult will go to seek medical care, the quality of care received by the older adult. In short, doctors may not provide the most quality care. You know, an example I have seen is that an individual who was concerned about memory loss was offered a medication for Alzheimer's disease without doing any test to ensure that there's not another cause. So that's really important. Social and economic opportunities. An adult who loses their employment after age 50, it can be exceptionally difficult to find a new job. There's new research out there that indicates nearly every $7 spent on the 8 most expensive medical conditions, so like cardiovascular disease can be attributed to ageism, which is startling. 1 out of nearly every $7. That tells us that how we think about aging, how others think about aging, is a really important issue that we have to start addressing if we want to improve health and wellness outcomes, increase the probability of aging well. We're going to talk a little bit about gerontology, just to make sure that background on kind of what this study is well understood. So gerontology is a scientific study of aging. Geriatrics is medical care that focuses on older adults. And I hope you noticed my use of aging versus older adults. Aging is a process that begins somewhere in our 20s. Older adults are people. So the focus of gerontology and geriatrics are similar, but they're different. Gerontology was coined by Eli Metchnikoff in 1904, so that shows you how new. As the field of study expanded, it included the biological, psychological, and social aspects of the aging process. And that's why we now know that how we age is a really complex interaction between who we are and where we live. The 20th century really is the dawn of gerontology research. And, for me, I personally feel like I'm on the cutting edge of science by studying this field. So it's a really exciting field to be in. So before we move on to aging well, let's touch on some of the landmark research that really informed what we know about aging. The Harvard study of adult development was among the first. It was in the 1930s, and they followed 268 participants over time to see how they age. The MacArthur study on successful aging took place between 2007 and 2017, and that was just an overall study of successful aging. The Baltimore longitudinal study is one of the largest. It was launched in 1958 and has followed 3,200 volunteers over time. This study is how we know dementia is not normal aging. This study is how we know what is normal aging in the brain, what is normal aging in the body, because we have been able to follow so many people over time. And they are trying to study more centenarians to try to understand how some people live to age 100 and beyond, like what's going on in them physically. Blue zones is some cross-sectional research. There are 7 areas, I believe, it could be more or less, where the number of centenarians is exceptionally high. A lot of people have very long lives. And so these areas of the world have been studied quite enthusiastically to understand what features of these places, what commonalities can they find that these groups share. So the findings. Let's talk about the findings. Increasing risk versus inevitability. That is kind of the really most important finding. Our body, as we change over time, the risk does increase for us to develop disability or chronic disease, but it's not inevitable. As we become older, we become more diverse in our health and wellness. You think about a 20-something, pretty much most 20-year-olds are pretty similar. They have pretty similar abilities. When you get to adults past the age of 65, there's way more diversity than, for health and wellness particularly, than younger adults. We do know strategies to age well. The research has told us quite a bit on what is needed for us to achieve kind of that health and wellness goal. So now let's get into how do we age well? How do we get there? And Jane and I really like the wellness wheel. Oh, Jane, before I move on, did you want to add anything about kind of what I've talked about so far that I might have missed?
Oh, Lucy, I think you've done an excellent job kind of laying the foundation for this topic. So keep going forward.
Thanks, Jane. So we really like this tool for wellness. Wellness is not merely the absence of disease. At this point in time, what we know, disease does happen. We are learning more and more about how to manage and experience wellness in the face of disease. So to achieve wellness, there's that spiritual aspect, the physical aspect, the emotional, mental, environmental, financial, the vocation or occupation, our social and our intellectual. Each dimension is important for us to experience health and wellness, and these parts are interconnected. Jane and I, as we were developing this presentation, we were struggling a little bit because some of the pieces that we thought fit in spiritual also fit in emotional or physical. So that's I think the important thing to remember about wellness. You know, it's not clean, easy pieces you just squeeze together and you have this beautiful picture of wellness. It takes work. So without further ado, let's talk about that physical wellness piece. So that physical wellness, you know, making choices to avoid harmful habits and practices that support physical body and health and safety. With those blue zones, probably one of the most interesting things about those blue zones is that they didn't exercise. Movement was just part of life. They didn't have to make time to go to the gym. They had to walk up and down the hill to get water or to get food. So that natural movement was part of it. So one of the most classic, and I'm sure we've all heard it, that we need to exercise and eat healthy food and keeping that healthy weight. And these are all things that we commonly hear, and it can get, I know it gets frustrating. You know, my weight goes up and down personally, and it gets frustrating. But I think most important one is the second from the bottom. See your doctor regularly and follow their recommendations. So for myself, 2 years in a row, when I went to the VA and my doctor tested my blood, my vitamin D level was low. So a year ago, I was like, okay, I'll start taking vitamin D supplement. Well, lo and behold, this year when I go to see my doctor, my vitamin D level is where it should be. But then my weight is not where it should be. And because I see my doctor every year, I know that when I weigh too much, my good cholesterol gets low. Mine's always low, but it gets much lower. So these elements are very important, and these are just examples. You know, wear sunscreens daily. That may not be one we think about, but skin cancer, I mean, our skin is our largest organ on our body. So that physical wellness is exceptionally important. But as I said, these are all linked. So we're going to jump forward to that emotional wellness, you know, understanding our own feelings, understanding how to express how we feel in constructive ways, and being able to deal with stress. I mean, it's that grit, it's that resiliency. That realistically, grit and resiliency are probably some of the most important skills that we need to cultivate to achieve aging well. You know, so sleep is exceptionally important. Doing activities you enjoy, you know, whether it's bike riding, gardening, you know, coaching a youth baseball team, finding those things. Managing stressful life events. I mean, life is hard. Life is full of stress. You know, there will always be things that we have to deal with. So how we manage those events is exceptionally important. You know, some people will manage them by drinking excessively. That has consequences. There's actually a type of dementia that's linked to excessive drinking. Having a positive attitude. This one can be exceptionally difficult. For myself, one thing that I tend to do is I keep a gratitude journal. I've done it off and on for about 5 years, but initially I would write 3 things I was grateful for every day. And sometimes, I mean, I'm grateful for power tools. You know, it doesn't have to be like life-changing. But what we know is that if we practice gratitude, those positive pathways in our brain get stronger. The same is true if we practice kind of negativity. Those pathways get stronger, and our brain will eventually just default to whatever pathways we've trained. And that's the thing about the brain. What we know now about the brain is that it is very plastic. And over time, our brain will continue to grow and recover. And realistically, the brain actually gets better over time. Not faster. That's kind of a limitation of our, you know, human thinking. But as long as there's no disease, the brain can get better. Having a sense of purpose, having a reason to get out of bed. It doesn't have to be life-changing necessarily, but having those things that make you get out of bed in the morning. You know, it could be grandchildren, it could be your job, it could be your volunteer, it could be your garden, it could be your cat. But having that, adapting to change. As we age, there are some pretty significant changes that may happen. You know, we know how to age well, but as we said earlier, aging well does not mean we're disease or disability free. It means in spite of those things, we can still have that emotional and mental wellness, and we can still feel good about our life as it is, and practice that good coping. So we're going to move on. That social wellness, we need people. We are social animals, and we need diverse, supportive relationships. And we have to kind of have those, you know, conflicts to, or excuse me, those opportunities to manage interpersonal conflicts. That's what keeps our brain strong. That's what keeps our body strong. So some example, build positive relationships with other people, participate in activities and events that connect you with people of all ages. Learn how to manage difficult challenges, difficult conversations, difficult situations. You know, that is probably one of the most important skills we have to do, because, you know, we're all people, we're all limited, we can't read each other's minds. So there are going to be opportunities for misunderstanding. So if we can learn to manage those. Join clubs, book clubs, groups, travel, and visit with your friends and families. It's just building that social wellness. Intellectual wellness. Be creative. You know, often when we think of, you know, creativity, we may be thinking of painting or, you know, art, you know, sculptures, whatever, but being creative is, it refers to anything. You know, I like science, you know, so there is a creative element to science, and, you know, trying to imagine what could be based on what we know now. There's creativity in woodworking, there's creativity in cooking, there's creativity, so be creative, you know. Learn new things, you know, actively engage in learning new things. Participate in book clubs, teach community education classes, challenge yourself with games or puzzles. I do want to kind of elaborate on that one. There has been kind of, the market's been inundated with brain games. If you enjoy playing them, that's wonderful. But what they say they can do for us doesn't match what science tells us. You will get better at whatever skill that brain game is having you do, but it doesn't necessarily build the new pathways that are really needed to keep our brain strong. Problem-solving skills, you know, that challenging our brain, trying to figure out things. So kind of a funny example, I was in an airport in Chicago and was bored. I was so tired too. It'd been a long day. And, you know, I was coming back to Rapid City, and I'm like, I was looking at the seat map. I'm like, that looks like a bigger plane than you normally take into Rapid. You know, so I counted the number of rows and then all the way down and across, and I tried to multiply the number of rows by, you know, how many people were across each row. In my head, math is not my strength in my head. But challenging ourselves is a really good way to kind of build that intellectual wellness. And with things that we're not good at, I mean, I think I would emphasize that. Something that you're not good at, challenge yourself to try to be better at it. Vocational, occupational, you know, this is kind of that purpose piece, that calling throughout retirement. You know, retirement is kind of this weird 20th century blip. You know, in the past, people didn't really retire. They transitioned into different things. And, you know, we kind of need to revisit that idea. So, you know, if you want to get paid employment, that could be a great option. Having that purposeful, you know, piece, contributing something of value. And it could be, you know, being a family caregiver is exceptionally valuable, you know, so finding that, maintaining vocational skills through hobby and leisure, you know, so having that something to keep you occupied, those vocational skills growing, is exceptionally important to how we experience aging. Spiritual wellness, having beliefs and values that provide sense of purpose and help give meaning to life, you know. And this, some examples of what this might look like, spend time reflecting on goals and priorities, and how they connect to your purpose. So an example from myself, we use a tool in Extension called Logic Model. And a logic model is a way that we organize what we know about a problem we're trying to solve, what resources we need to solve it, what activities are we going to do to solve it, and what do we expect to change if we solve it, if our idea works. I developed one of those for myself to think about, okay, what do I hope to achieve in my professional work? So you don't have to do it the way I did it, but spending that time reflecting on what matters to you, what's important to you. Participate in group or individual faith-based or spiritual activities. So basically, whatever that spirituality looks like, that practice it. Personal meditation. Meditation is meditation is great for mental health. It's great for physical health because it kind of helps slow you down. So practice meditation. Spend time in nature. Practice mindful exercise such as yoga or Tai Chi. It gives you that physical piece, and then it gives you that mental piece. So environmental wellness, this is about where you live. We talked about how important where we live is to how we experience aging. So downsizing to meet personal goals. If you've had a big 4-bedroom house for most of your life, but now your children are out, might it make sense to downsize to a smaller home? And what are the benefits of that? More free time to do the other stuff. Homes have maintenance, so if you downsize to a smaller home, then you have more time for the spirituality, for the occupational, for the learning. Perform those home maintenance and repairs. This is part of that wellness piece. So checking for radon gas, keeping humidity levels low, repairing leaks, all of that stuff is really important, because if we allow that stuff to fester, we could end up with mold in our home, and then mold can affect our wellness. Assess home for promoting independence and well-being. This one is one of my really favorite ones. Is our home appropriate for us until the very end of our life? And if it's not, then we need to figure out, do we have the resources to try to change that? Assess the community for meeting those future needs. At some point, we're all going to need support. That wellness piece is basically being able to know what resources are available to you and how you're going to pay for them, And in some situations, so you think some of our folks living in really rural communities, they may have to make a decision to move into a more large community that has more resources. So it's having that conversation with yourself about making sure my home environment is going to be a good fit for as long as possible. So financial wellness. It's not about necessarily having a lot of money, but being satisfied with current and future financial situations. Most of us would like to have a few more resources, but most of us are also very practical. So step one is figure out what your goals and priorities are for the later stages of life. If traveling around the country in an RV is your goal, what are you going to do to make that happen? If you want to move close to adult children to kind of be a grandparent and help them, how are you going to make that happen? If you want to live in an assisted living community, how are you going to make that happen? So it's a matter of figuring out what's important to you, what needs to happen for you to be able to get to your goal. And there's going to be financial resources needed to accomplish your goals. That's kind of a given. Sometimes it may not be possible. So you think about a home that needs to be modified. A split level home just may not be practical or viable to remodel. The resources just may be too much. Discuss where you'd like to live and receive long-term services and support. Jane and I witness this far too often that people do not have this conversation with their families. And that end of life piece is exceptionally important, because if the preference is for all care to happen at home, well, there's a lot that needs to happen for that to take place. If the preference is in assisted living, there's other things that have to be considered. So really spending time thinking about that. It's not pleasant to think about a time when we may not be as independent as we are now, or if we're facing kind of that end of life. But one way to help kind of help you work through this process could be writing your own obituary. I actually wrote mine yesterday because I signed my will yesterday. That can be a really good strategy to kind of help process some of the emotions that will emerge when you think about a time when you're not here. Because that is, death and taxes are the only things that are sure in this life. So we know. And that links to the last one, making sure your paperwork, legal, financial, any important paperwork is organized and the people who need to know where it is can get to it. All right, so I want you to take a minute and think about one action step you plan to do. I know I ran through a lot, but I imagine for some of you, and it's all right if you have nothing to share. I imagine for some of you, you thought of something maybe you want to do to try to increase your opportunities for you to age well. So we'll give you about a minute and a half to write things down. Jane, I got to stay on you about that one, Jane. Hopefully Jane won't mind. But Jane, you know, and I, as gerontologists, we know much of what's supposed to be done. But Jane and I both struggle with getting enough physical activity, you know, even though we know better. So her and I both have to keep each other accountable on that one. So I don't know who Wick is, but Wick says update our will, and that's a very important one. Margie says she wants to plan for funeral and burial. Yep, that's a very important one. It's a very emotional process. Discuss where to live in retirement, hopefully around or near kids. So I don't know who PH admin is. So are you saying you want to be around your kids or just kids in general? My family, excellent. Yes, wonderful. You know, and having those bonds with our families, it's really helpful. So thank you everyone for sharing some of those things that you want to do. And it's okay if nothing jumped to your head immediately. That's okay. This process takes a lot of time. You know, Jane and I understand that, you know, developing a personalized plan can be really difficult. Sometimes it's just so overwhelming to develop that personalized plan, to know where to get started. Some of us are already facing some pretty significant challenges that require a little bit of extra work. So we have evidence-based programs in North Dakota and South Dakota. When we send this slide deck out to you, you will be able to click on all of these titles. But these programs are designed to help people work through the process to manage, you know, topics like family caregiving, because family caregiving is exceptionally strong. Learn how to reduce fall risk, especially when experiencing really complicated health. How to manage chronic disease like diabetes, heart disease, how to manage those things. Anxiety, that's one that I live with. I have to manage anxiety, and it is a chronic disease that I have had to learn to deal with. Better Choices, Better Health is another program for chronic disease self-management. Walk with Ease and Fit and Strong are two programs that teach people with osteoarthritis how to exercise. So there's a lot of different options available on, well, how can I create my own, you know, plan to age well? Jane, is there anything you'd like to add? I hope you have something to add. Jane, you're muted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I was just, do we want to talk a little bit about the Wellness Wheel handout? That would be a good activity for participants to take a look at when it gets emailed to them after the webinar?
I'm glad, I don't think I had that as a note to talk about, but yes, absolutely. So The wellness wheel handout, I'm going to back up a couple slides. I should have mentioned it here. So we have a handout that we're going to send you that has a wellness wheel on it. It has, each slide had a description of what the wellness wheel elements are. It has a summary of all of those, and you can go through this little worksheet and kind of think about yourself and your personal wellness wheel and where you might need to give some TLC, some extra attention. And we'll be sending that out to you. Also on that handout, I've got 2 books here. I really like these books. The information about these books will be included in that handout. What Color is Your Parachute has a lot of information, a lot of activities that you can work through to think about, okay, what do I want my retirement to look like? And I'm going to emphasize, this is not about financial planning. You know, I think financial planning and retirement kind of gets beaten to death. This is about what matters to you in those retirement years. And, you know, as I said, I don't really like retirement. I think we need to just retire that concept altogether. So this is a great book. It will be in that handout. The other one I like is this Purposeful Retirement. What I enjoy about this book is it's got a lot of really short chapters with discussion questions. So this book here would make a great book club book for adults that are really interested in exploring what purpose looks like in that last third of life. So the information is on that handout. All right. So kind of that aging well and car maintenance. We understand that to get the most miles out of our car, that we have to perform routine maintenance. We understand that even if we do all that, you know, we could still have a tree fall on our car during a storm, or we could have a catastrophic failure, like an engine block cracking, you know. And our body is similar to that, routine maintenance. Aging is an important developmental process that may involve loss. You know, that loss could be loss of independence, the loss of a loved one, loss of income, but it also has gains, wisdom, grandchildren, more independence, maybe more flexibility. I mean, personally, that's something I'm kind of striving for, is when I can have piece together a bunch of different jobs to just entertain all of my different interests. You know, I look forward to that. By spending time creating your personal vision of aging well and what it looks like for you and your family, you'll be able to develop those action steps that you need to get there and the resiliency you need to achieve your goals. So in summary, to age well does not mean you will never face hardship or loss. Aging well means that in the face of extremely difficult situations, you are able to retain whatever it is that gives you meaning and purpose in life. So our websites are on the screen. Our next webinar will be September 11th, and we'll talk about those difficult conversations. So I can open the floor up to questions. You may type them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and speak. So by all means, we would love to have some questions. We'll give you a little bit more time in case people are typing. I put on the screen, if it's still sharing, the document, the handout that Jane and I were talking about. I did put that up on the screen so you could kind of see what it looks like. That will be coming to you via email. So we have a question came to me privately about resources to keep driving safely as an older adult. Jane, I know that AARP had CarFit. Do you happen to know if that program's still active?
I believe that it still is. Yes.
I don't know if CarFit is actually available in South Dakota, so let me pull up the website. But CarFit is a useful program that can help older adults learn, you know, what is needed to help them them drive more safely. So I'm going to pop this link in the chat box if everybody wants to see it, so you have it. So that is one program. So beyond resources to keep driving safely, so doing driver education is exceptionally helpful for maintaining, you know, driving as we get older. Making sure glasses are up, being aware of what medications a person is taking, and you know, understanding how that affects ability to drive. One really helpful thing that, you know, to keep in mind, our vision as it changes, like I've already seen it in myself, that night driving is more difficult. So one strategy, not necessarily a resource, but one strategy might be to refrain from driving at night, or maybe refrain from driving at sunset or sunrise when the angle of the sun is lower and more likely to create a glare. You know, so it's doing some of those adaptive things ourselves. I hope that answered your question. I won't say your name since you sent it to me privately.
Lacey?
Yeah, Margie.
Also, AARP has a driver safety course where if you take that with companies, you can get a discount or, you know, a percentage off of your car insurance.
Awesome. Here, I know that's what I was wondering too. So I'm going to grab the link to that one too, and I'll also drop it into the chat box. But that was a great question to ask about that driving, because it's kind of disconcerting to lose the ability to drive. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Awesome. Well, we are really grateful that you gave us your time today. I will be sending this, the PowerPoint and the handout out to you as soon as we are done. And Jane will be included on that email, so you are welcome to reach out to either one of us. Awesome. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.